our there we go. I also want to thank our friends from FEMA and NOAA who are joining us tonight to provide insightful information into how to prepare for this hurricane season. I was born and raised in Orlando, Florida, so I am a Florida man, and I know just how devastating hurricanes can be on all of our communities. I know how many of us here remember what our state just lived through with Hurricane Ian, especially here in Central Florida. We saw and we continue to see the devastation in Southwest Florida and the flooding and destruction that the storm brought into Central Florida as well. In fact, it was just last year that we first started canvassing and going around to speak with residents in Orla Vista about the flooding. There are still people living in sheds because the flooding was so bad in Orla Vista. We lost more than 100 lives during that storm. After Hurricane Ian, many of us have a renowned and reowned sense of urgency when it comes to preparing for hurricanes. And this is something my dad used to tell me growing up, and it's the motto for hurricane season: hope for the best, plan for the worst. NOAA will discuss this more, but we expect an above normal hurricane season, which isn't good. Hurricane season started just 20 days ago. We're already seeing a hotter than average summer across our country, leading to warmer ocean temperatures and stronger, more dangerous storms. And we've seen this happen over the course of several years, especially due to the climate crisis, the rising temperatures in the surrounding ocean, which fuel these hurricanes, make them have more devastating consequences and last longer. We need to ensure that our state and federal government adapt to the climate crisis and take effective steps to protect our people from the worst of these natural disasters. From my office, I've introduced two bills of legislation, or two pieces of legislation that I want to talk about really quickly. The first one is the Safe Through Medicare Act, which would require that things like air conditioners, refrigerators, generators, solar batteries, and more be covered under Medicare. So that way seniors and those with disabilities can safely weather any storm, especially post-storm when the power goes out. This is so that way our seniors can still use their BiPAP machines, keep their insulin cool, dialysis, oxygen, etc. We want to make sure they have that human infrastructure at home. So if the power is out for a couple weeks, these things can still keep running, a lot of these life-saving machines. This bill would require Medicare to cover 100% of the cost of medically necessary equipment for folks during natural disasters. The other one is the Fixing Gaps in Hurricane Preparedness Act, which actually passed the House as a part of the Weather Act, which we passed a few weeks ago. With Florida being one of the states most susceptible to strong storms and hurricanes, this bipartisan bill would ensure that hurricane preparedness tools, alerts, and planning systems across the board really hone in and address the needs of seniors, people with disabilities, and non-English speakers, especially folks in rural communities, which through our surveying and speaking with folks in the district, those were the constituencies we identified where we can use the most improvement on in terms of hurricane preparedness. And so we're really excited about that. Our emergency communication and preparedness systems have to meet Floridians where they are, and obviously our friends at NOAA and FEMA are doing an amazing job. This bill would help to even increase and build off the amazing work that's going on. It's bipartisan. I wrote it. Daniel Webster is a Republican who's signed on to it. We both really care about this and both sit on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. Look, before we get into it, I just want to make sure you all know that our office is here to support you throughout hurricane season and even outside of hurricane season. We're here to help you with constituent services. So if you need help with the federal agency, please feel free to reach out to our office. You can go to frost.house.gov. You can give us a call, send us an email. We're here to help you out. Medicare, Medicaid, IRS, passports, which, by the way, some big news we just announced, and this is something I've been fighting for since I got to Congress. The state of Florida will be receiving a second passport agency, and it's going to be in Orlando, Florida. So we're really excited about that win. That's just a sidebar. I also want to encourage folks to visit our hurricane preparedness resource page on our website to access additional resources from Orange County and the city of Orlando. And with that, again, thank you all for being here and for joining us. I'm going to pass it over to our friends and the amazing team at NOAA to introduce themselves. Thank you so much for being here.
Great. Thank you, Congressman Frost. A real pleasure to be here. I'm Mike Brennan. I'm the director of NOAA's National Hurricane Center in Florida, but in South Florida here in Miami. So it's a real pleasure to be with you here. We have responsibility for issuing forecasts and warnings for tropical storms and hurricanes all across the United States, and in cooperation with our friends at the local National Weather Service offices. And I'll turn it over to Dave Sharp and Will Ulrich from the Weather Forecast Office in Melbourne.
Hello, everybody. It's really good to be with you here this evening. It's good to rally up here with the folks that are on this call and to share some experiences, to share some information, to share some forecasts, not only for today and tomorrow, but across the entire season as we prepare for this, very busy hurricane season that stands to be in front of us. And so it means a lot, I think, to be part of the community that you work in, but also are part of delivering a mission for, and the mission is to protect life and property. And we take that pretty serious. So I'd like to now go ahead and share introductions with Will Ulrich from here.
Thanks, Dave. And Mike, certainly appreciate that, and certainly appreciate the invitation to today. As has been mentioned many times, the importance of preparedness is key as we enter what is expected to be a busy hurricane season. And we are not immune to tropical impacts. We are a resilient community, but it all starts now. While we are reminded that we are about 20 days into the start of the hurricane season, we still have plenty more to go. So we certainly appreciate today's opportunity to talk with you all. We'll share some experiences, as Dave mentioned, and some preparedness tips to get you and your family ready for whatever Mother Nature has to throw at us later this season. So with that said, I will go ahead and share our screen so that Mike Brennan can begin his section of the presentation. So can I get a thumbs up once we... Alrighty, there we go.
Looks good. Thank you, Will and Dave. And thanks again to the Congressman for the attention to this important issue related to hurricanes or hurricane preparedness. You're taking a big step for everybody who's on here just by being aware and knowing it's hurricane season and taking the initiative to learn more about what the risks are, particular to your community in Central Florida. And it's, as Dave mentioned, it's important to be part of that community and take what you share here and what you learn today and share it with your friends, your neighbors, your relatives, and help make it a community effort to be ready for what promises to be a busy season. So as I mentioned, I'm Mike Brennan, director of NOAA's National Hurricane Center here in Miami. We'll go right to it and go on to the next slide. And first, before we look forward to 2024, we're going to take a quick look back at 2023, a reminder of what the last hurricane season brought us. It was pretty active in the Atlantic Basin. Overall, we had 20 tropical storms, 7 of which went on to become hurricanes. But for those of us in the United States, it was not as busy a season as it has been for many of the previous years. However, we did have a major hurricane landfall in Florida with Hurricane Idalia that made landfall in the Florida Big Bend region in late August and produced a very significant storm surge, significant wind damage, some rainfall flooding, resulted in 8 fatalities in the United States. All were from surf and rip currents, which is an emerging hazard in tropical storms and hurricanes. One of those direct fatalities from Idalia was in Florida. And we'll touch a little bit more on fatalities and trends, particular to Florida here in a few minutes. But again, a reminder that it only takes one storm affecting your community to make it a busy season, regardless of what any hurricane seasonal forecast says. That's particularly true here in Florida, where we're vulnerable to hurricanes approaching from the south, from the west, from the east. And really, we're vulnerable to storms and their impacts all season long, from June all the way through November. So as it's noted here on the slide, we have people moving to Florida, moving to hurricane-prone areas every year. So we have more people in harm's way. So it's really vital that we improve the readiness of our communities, the communication of information about the storms and their hazards and the forecast. And that's so vitally important too, as Dave mentioned, our mission of protecting lives and property. If we go on to the next slide, now we'll talk about the hurricane season that we're facing for 2024. So NOAA's forecast is for an above normal season, 85% chance of an above normal season. And we're forecasting between 17 and 25 tropical storms, 8 to 13 of those expected to go on and become hurricanes, with 4 to 7 of those becoming major hurricanes. So the typical numbers, or average year, would be 14, 7, and 3. So we're well above normal, especially at the high end of these ranges. Would be a very, very active season. Again, we've already had our first named storm. It just formed yesterday and made landfall in Mexico along the western Gulf Coast. If we go on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about why we expect this season to be busy. So as the congressman mentioned, we have very warm ocean temperatures across almost the entire North Atlantic basin. And warm ocean water is the fuel for tropical storms and hurricanes to form. That's where they get their energy from. We've had these warm ocean temperatures in the Atlantic almost near record warm temperatures going back even to last year. But last year we had El Nino ongoing in the Eastern Pacific, which tends to make conditions in the atmosphere less favorable for tropical storms and hurricanes to form in the Atlantic basin. It increases what we call vertical wind shear, which is the change of wind speed and direction with height, which tends to sort of rip storms apart as they try to form. But this year, we're expecting to see La Nina develop, which is the opposite of El Nino. And La Nina is expected to develop sometime later this summer and be in place by the time we reach the peak of the hurricane season, which is that August to October timeframe. And that's when the vast majority of the hurricane activity happens. Most of the major hurricanes occur during that period. And most of them come out of this yellow box you see here on the screen, which is called the main development region. And we expect conditions to be very favorable for tropical storms and hurricanes to form with those warm ocean waters, below average vertical wind shear this year, weaker easterly trade winds, and a strong West African monsoon, which lead to stronger tropical waves coming off the coast of Africa, which tend to result in the development of storms and hurricanes across the tropical Atlantic at the peak of the season. On to the next slide. Just a quick look at the names. We just had Alberto form yesterday, made landfall in Mexico, as I mentioned. So the next named storm that we get in the Atlantic will be Beryl. There are 21 names on this list. If we reach the high end of that seasonal forecast prediction, we will use all of these names and go into a supplemental or secondary name list that we work on with the World Meteorological Organization. So we're not using the Greek alphabet anymore. If any of you remember that from 2020, well, we had that. We decided to move on from that. So we have a list of regular male and female names that we'll move on to if we get past William this year. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit now about what's going on in the Atlantic today. We actually have a couple of systems that we're watching. This is our 7-day tropical weather outlook that talks about the potential for systems to form over the next week. So you see we have two systems. The one closest to Florida is out to the north of the Bahamas. We have a 40% chance of that system becoming a tropical depression within the next 2 days as it moves northwestward towards either the northeast Florida coast or the coast of Georgia. Not expecting that system to become very strong. If it does become a tropical cyclone, probably maybe not even attaining tropical storm strength, but it could enhance some rainfall and some locally gusty winds across portions of the northeast Florida coast and the Georgia coast over the next couple of days. We're also monitoring another area, the other orange area you see in the southern Gulf of Mexico, near where Alberto formed. We could see another system try to take shape this weekend or early next week in the southern Gulf of Mexico. So kind of busy for June. It's about on schedule for us to have had our first named storm. Actually, the average date is today. So we had it a day early, but we've got a couple other systems we're watching at the moment. Go on to the next slide. You'll actually see a satellite image of a small area of low pressure we're watching to the east of Florida. Again, we'll keep an eye on that during the next couple of days as it approaches the southeast U.S. coast, but not expected to bring too much in the way of significant impacts. The next slide, we'll talk a little bit about some of the new things we're doing at the Hurricane Center for the 2024 hurricane season. One thing we're very excited about is a full suite of Spanish language text products for all of our tropical storm and hurricane advisory packages and products that we issue here at the Hurricane Center. We tested out AI-driven translation techniques to take our products, which we write in English, and translate them to Spanish almost instantaneously. And we were able to implement that this year, and we actually just used it during Alberto during the past couple of days. And the products were translating and showing up on our website within a minute of the English products being sent out. So it's allowed us to greatly expand our offering of our Spanish language products to all of our public-facing products in both the Atlantic and the Eastern Pacific basins in 2024. And you can find those products on our website at hurricanes.gov, along with the English products and all of the storm-related graphics and watches and warnings. On the next slide, you'll see another product that we're going to be experimenting with as we reach the peak of the hurricane season. This is an experimental version of our cone graphic, which has been around for about 20 years, but we're experimenting with a new version this year that's going to show the inland tropical storm and hurricane watches and warnings on the graphic. So this is an example of what this would have looked like for Hurricane Ian that the congressman mentioned formed and hit Florida back in 2022. You can see that entire area in red across Central Florida, including the Orlando region, was under a hurricane warning. And that will be more accurately depicted in these inland areas on this graphic this year once we roll it out in mid-August. But you can see that in Ian, we had watches and warnings covering much of the Florida peninsula, also extending well inland into portions of Georgia and South Carolina, better conveying the wind risk from those wind hazards to the population in those areas. And we'll be experimenting with this year, collecting feedback and comments to see how people interpret it and see if it's something we should try to continue for 2025. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit, now get into a little bit of the fatality trends related to tropical storms and hurricanes in Florida from the 2013 to 2023. And these little circles show you the during the storm fatalities, which we call direct deaths in red, which are directly due to the forces of the storm itself, either the wind or the storm surge or the flooding rainfall or rip currents, and the indirect fatalities in blue, which are largely occurring after the storm, not directly due to the forces of the storm itself, but things like accidents, heat-related deaths, carbon monoxide poisonings, events that likely would not have occurred had there not been a tropical storm or hurricane. So what you can take away from this graphic is the direct fatalities in Florida numbered about 100 over this 11-year period. The indirect fatalities were almost double that, 200. And they occur across the state, at the coast, inland. So everybody's at risk of these hazards when we have a storm and after a storm occurs. And we'll go through a little bit of the details of them in just a minute. Here on the next slide, we'll look at the direct fatalities that have affected Florida over the last 11 years. Half of those have been storm surge, and almost all of those occurred in Lee County in Southwest Florida during Hurricane Ian in 2022. But you see that the vast majority of the fatalities, about 90% of them, are water related. They're either due to storm surge, freshwater flooding due to heavy rainfall, surf and rip currents, or fatalities that occur out on the water in a vessel or a boat. But again, the main message is that across Florida, we're at risk of all the hurricane hazards, and particularly in Orlando area. You don't have to worry about storm surge there, obviously, but you do if you're at the coast. But you have to worry about the freshwater flooding. That has been the biggest killer in the United States overall in tropical storms and hurricanes in the last 11 years, responsible for more than half the fatalities if you go to look across all of the U.S. during that time period. And wind can certainly be a hazard as well, as Dave and will talk about. Inland wind events with Florida, major hurricane landfalls can bring hurricane force winds inland across the entire peninsula. The next slide, we'll look at the indirect fatalities. As I mentioned, these are not directly due to the forces of the storm itself, but related to accidents or activities people are undertaking related to the storm. You see they're spread across a variety of causes, ranging from car accidents to power problems and electrocution, carbon monoxide poisoning due to improper generator use, heat-related fatalities in the aftermath of a storm with no air conditioning, general accidents related to storm preparation or recovery, falling off ladders, having accidents with equipment or tools. But a lot of these have to do with loss of power, heat-related, medical access, your medical device doesn't work, carbon monoxide poisonings, power problems, or electrocution. So in the aftermath of major hurricanes, where there's widespread long-duration power outages, these indirect fatalities can outnumber the direct deaths due to the storm itself. So, and this has been a particular issue in the state of Florida, has had far and away the most indirect fatalities of any state in the country over this time period, again, suffering multiple major hurricane landfalls during this period. So this has become an increasing point of emphasis from our perspective in the weather services on this post-storm safety. The last slide we'll show is, from my perspective, is just the challenge that we face here in Florida and along the Gulf Coast with short lead times. Storms that form very close by, make landfall within 3 or 4 days. These can be some of the strongest hurricanes that have ever hit the United States. In fact, this is the tracks of the 10 strongest storms that have hit the U.S. in the last 100 years. 5 of them hit Florida. All of them were tropical storms 3 days before landfall. So to become a high-end Category 4 or Category 5 hurricane, storms have to rapidly intensify, and they tend to do that early in their life cycle. So you can see storms like Ian, Michael, Charlie, Andrew, the Labor Day hurricane of 1935, they all formed nearby, rapidly strengthened, and made landfall at or near their peak intensity. So this speaks to the necessity of having a hurricane plan, having your plan in place now so that you can put it into action very quickly if a storm develops and threatens us within just a few days here in Florida. So that's all I have from the NHC perspective. I'll turn it now over to Dave and Will to give you some information from the local weather forecast office in Melbourne. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. I certainly appreciate that. Now it's our turn to kind of offer a local perspective with regards to this upcoming hurricane season. As you know, again, as was mentioned earlier, we're the local National Weather Service office in Melbourne that covers 10 counties of East Central Florida, and Orange County is in the heart of what we call our county warning area, and we have the primary warning responsibility for your area. We are just one of 122 forecast offices spread throughout the country. We have about 22, 23 employees right now that operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to issue those life-saving, critical weather safety alerts, whether those are heat advisories or tropical storm warnings or flash flood watches or wind advisories, you name it. Those type of advisories are originating from your local National Weather Service office, and they are incredibly important during a hurricane emergency. So as we move into the upcoming hurricane season, it's important for you to get that information from reliable sources, and we hope you consider NOAA and the National Weather Service one of those reliable sources. But we are here for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You see some pictures of what our office looks like on the north side of the Melbourne International Airport. We have a very important role of the federal government, and that is for the protection of life and property through those critical weather safety alerts. But it's not just the weather safety alerts that we're issuing to do that. We also issue weather, water, and climate data forecasts, warnings, and impact-based decision support services for those 10 counties within our respective area, because we hope to get to a point where we have a society that is prepared for and can respond to whatever Mother Nature has to throw at us. But we can't do it alone. It's important to have multiple messengers that say the same thing, and that is especially critical during an emergency situation like a hurricane. And locally within Orange County, we work closely with Orange County Emergency Management, the City of Orlando Emergency Management, as well as the Orange County Public Schools Office of Emergency Management, which we recently designated as a storm-ready community. In fact, the Orange County Public School District is now the largest school district in the nation to have that designation. And we appreciate all the efforts that our partners within Orange County have for us. Now, if you're interested in getting our information directly from the source, in other words, the National Weather Service, we invite you to check out our website again at weather.gov. We take all of that information from our partners or our national centers, like what Mike Brennan was talking about from the National Hurricane Center. They issue those big picture forecasts, and then we localize it. So consider us the local meteorological experts, and you can get the insight into our forecast by checking out weather.gov. So regardless of where you're traveling to in the country, or if you just want to get a forecast from home, you can go to weather.gov. But if you're in Orange County and you want to get the forecast directly from our office, check out weather.gov/MLB or /Melbourne. That information is available to you 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. Okay. That's enough talking about the National Weather Service. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty details of what this season may bring. Orange County is a unique county, right? Again, it's one of 10 counties that is within our area of responsibility. But the city of Orlando and all of its adjacent communities are very complex terrain with rural communities to the east and highly urban communities along the I-4 corridor. So impacts are local and they can vary widely throughout the county. But the one thing that Orange County is it's not a coastal county. So when we look at all the different threats associated from a tropical cyclone, the one thing we don't have to worry about in Orange County directly is storm surge. However, we do have to deal with it in an indirect way. And that's because we have storm surge along our coastlines. And to some extent, storm surge also impacts our friends and neighbors along the St. Johns River. So sometimes we have to accept our friends from the coastlines during those mass evacuations when there is a storm that threatens the west or the east coast. One of the big things, big problems for Orange County, of course, is the wind associated with the tropical cyclone. Regardless of where the storm is coming from, whether it's the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic, we're not that far away from the coast, right? The city of Orlando is about 50 or 60 miles from either coast, give or take. So tropical cyclones, though the worst impacts are often along the immediate coastline, we still have to deal with the effects of a tropical cyclone, even as far inland as the city of Orlando. And those tropical winds can lead to significant damage to homes, building, trees, and utilities. And of course, we have some very vulnerable communities within our backyard, those manufactured homes, RVs and campers or houseboats that may become particularly susceptible during a landfalling system. As Hurricane Ian taught us back in 2022, we can't just focus on the wind hazard. We have to look at hurricanes from a holistic approach and focus on all four hazards. And that includes inland flooding, which, as we were reminded again with Hurricane Ian back in 2022, we saw significant flooding within our communities as the slow moving system moved up the I-4 corridor. The flooding potential of a hurricane is not tied to its strength. It is tied to its forward motion. And the slower the moving system, the more potential there is for flooding. Now, we had the remnants of Hurricane Ian back in 2022 that dumped anywhere from as much as 8 to 15 inches of rain in portions of the county. But we could go back in history and find other examples of tropical systems that have dumped prolific rain in our community. And I always like to look back at 2008 with Tropical Storm Faye. A lot of people say they were caught off guard back in 2008 because it was just a tropical storm. Well, the fact is, inland flooding or freshwater flooding is not tied directly to the strength of the storm, as I mentioned. Faye was a very slow moving system and ended up dumping anywhere from 15 to 25 inches of rain. And the difference with flooding rains versus wind is flooding rains can last longer. The impacts from flooding rainfall can be significant and be around for multiple weeks, if not months. In fact, during Hurricane Ian, the St. Johns River was in flood stage all the way through Christmas. And then one often overlooked threat associated with tropical cyclones are tornadoes, which can sometimes form in the outer rain bands of a tropical system. And sometimes they can form even so far ahead of the system that it's before the tropical storm force winds begin impacting a community. So maybe during the preparation phase, we might have to issue a tornado watch or tornado warning. So we have to consider that in our plans as we prepare for a storm. Tornadoes are very challenging to forecast during a landfalling cyclone because they're often very fast moving and they can be centered well away from the center. So it's something for us to keep in mind and have in your preparedness plans as we move forward into this upcoming hurricane season. Now, we're no stranger to tropical cyclones here in Central Florida, so I wanted to try and annotate that by showing you the number of hurricanes that have passed within 100 nautical miles of the city of Orlando. Now, why 100 nautical miles? Well, the fact is, it's important to recognize that tropical cyclones are not just single points. They have impacts well away from the center. And some storms, particularly larger storms, can have impacts hundreds of miles from the center. But for illustrative purposes, what I'm going to show you here today is cyclones that have moved within 100 nautical miles. And I'm going to show you hurricanes that have moved within 100 nautical miles of the city of Orlando, month by month, going back to record keeping in the mid-1800s. So for the month of June, we've had 2 hurricanes that have passed within 100 nautical miles. We move into the month of July, 3 hurricanes. Now, you'll also see the number of tropical storms that have moved within 100 nautical miles, but realize I do not show them on these graphics. So realize that it's not just hurricanes that can impact our community. And as I mentioned earlier, tropical storms can bring their own threats, maybe not necessarily damaging winds, but also flooding rainfall and tornadoes. As Mike mentioned, we really get into the peak of the season as we move into August, September, and October. And that's illustrated with the next graphic, which shows the number of tropical cyclones increase to 12 hurricanes and 17 tropical storms. We peak in the month of September with 21 hurricanes, some of our most violent hurricanes to ever impact the state of Florida and our communities have occurred in the months of September. But while people are beginning to think about fall as we move into the month of October, we simply cannot let our guard down because the fact is Central Florida has been impacted by plenty of hurricanes and tropical storms even into the month of October. In fact, 17 hurricanes have passed within 100 miles of the city of Orlando. Says as we start to think about those pumpkin spice lattes or putting out a pumpkin on our front porch, it's really important that we don't let our guard down, particularly within that 3-month period that starts on August 1st and continues through Halloween. Because as we move into the month of November, the Atlantic hurricane season really starts to begins to wind down. But in 2022, we were reminded that it still has some life in it. And sure enough, Hurricane Nicole impacted the Treasure Coast community and eventually moved a little bit closer to the city of Orlando, bringing widespread coastal erosion and damage to our beaches back in November of 2022. So keep in mind that these tropical cyclones are possible throughout the hurricane season, but the period where we really need to be concerned with is that August, September, and October timeframe. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dave so that we can talk about a very important threshold that we're meeting this year, and that's the historic 2004 hurricane season.
Yeah, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I did want to bring a few things to everybody's attention, to their remembrance, or maybe even to their education. And it has to do with the historic 2004 hurricane season that just really pounded the state of Florida. And when you look back and you try to learn some lessons, we have a lot of new residents. We always have a continuous flow of visitors, right? And we have a lot of folks that don't necessarily get information or messaging, through easy or traditional means. And so just some quick lessons real quick, and then we'll turn it over. But the 2004 season, the state of Florida got hit by 4 significant hurricanes. Hurricane Charlie made landfall as a Category 4, Francis as a Category 2, Ivan as a Category 3, and Jean as a Category 3. Now, all of these together really put the state of Florida through the ringer, but it also taught us a lot of lessons. Hurricanes come in all shapes, all sizes, all intensities, all forward motions, all different angles of approach, and every storm is different. That's the key. So if you're staring at a Hurricane Ian and go, I remember this is like Hurricane Charlie. No, there are similarities. There were some shifts to the right, but Charlie was a windstorm and Ian was a killer water storm. Big difference, right? And so we have to understand that as these systems intersect with our communities, because every community has different vulnerabilities too, there are going to be different impacts, and we have to kind of be on our game. So the 4 primary hazards: wind, storm surge, flooding, rain, and tornadoes. There's always a permutation. There's always a combination of those at play at any given location that we're interested in. So let's look at 1 or 2 quick lessons, and then turn things over per storm. Per storm. Hurricane Charlie. Hurricane Charlie basically reminds us to use extra caution when we have a storm that's, let's say, emerging into the eastern Gulf with a track that's roughly paralleling the peninsula. It doesn't take much change in forecast track to result in a big difference in terms of the location of the most significant impacts or the peak hurricane conditions, where they'll take place and where they'll occur. So we have to be on guard for that, and understand that even those small changes, even those small errors which are inherent in the forecast process, can really result in big differences. So we have to keep that in mind. And if you're a fast-moving small hurricane like Charlie, you're gonna just plow inland, right? And there are those wind concerns that Will was talking about. And so there are times where extreme winds really make it difficult for those who are trying to hide from the wind, when they find themselves, that small little group, that small little area that's subject to those extreme winds with major hurricanes. We try to help the folks get through that moment by urgently encouraging them to move to the safest place in their shelter. They're already sheltered, but it's time to move to the safest place. So Hurricane Charlie taught us that. Hurricane Francis taught us that hurricanes are not points on a map. And Hurricane Francis, definitely not a point. Huge system. And those impacts with those systems can occur well outside NHC's cone graphic, right? And so if you are as large a storm as this graphic shows, as Francis, in a comparative to Hurricane Charlie, look at the size difference. Charlie was small but moving fast, and Francis was huge and moving slow. It can really test the endurance of a community. Ivan taught us that some hurricanes can bring all of the hazards with it, right? And so we keep that in mind. But if you're a northward moving system in the Eastern Gulf, now if Ivan had been a little bit closer to the peninsula, or if you were more like let's say a Hurricane Matthew on the Atlantic side, those northward moving systems can still produce significant impacts, even though they are apparently just kind of brushing or paralleling just offshore. So kind of keep that in mind too. Hurricane Jean was really a function of just wearisomeness, right? Season can be long, it can be busy, and it can be exhausting. And this season could turn out that way too. So the season is long, but also much can happen in a very short period of time. 4 Florida hurricanes made landfall in Florida in a 6-week period. 2 of those hurricanes made landfall within a 3-week period and in the nearly exact same location. Can you imagine going into one hurricane having just come out of another? We really need to have our endurance. And so we need to be able to take action when a tropical system threatens, or maybe even when another one does too. So for the city of Orlando, the residents in Orange County, we talked about many new residents, a lot of visitors. We just want folks to be prepared and consider your own risk, consider the risk of where you are if you're visiting, and make your preparations and move through this sequence here of getting ready for the season. So this was designed to have questions for the NOAA folks, but let's hold off on those questions and move to a presentation now from FEMA, and then we'll rally up the questions.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. My name is Peter Milios with FEMA. I'm located in Region 4 in Atlanta, Georgia. But much like the congressman, I also grew up in the Orlando area, born and raised. So I'm very familiar with the area and the impacts of the storms, as mentioned by our partners at NOAA. So I will share my slides now. And I will turn off my video to save bandwidth here. Okay. So as I mentioned, we'll help you. You heard all about hurricane season. So now we'll provide some tips on how to best prepare and mitigate any of those impacts on you, your family, and your community. So with that, let's get started. FEMA's mission is to help people before, during, and after disasters. You'll hear that theme throughout this presentation, and something that we take to heart. Folks here at FEMA are dedicated to our mission. We work day in, day out throughout the year to ensure that people are ready for disasters when they happen, we're there when they happen, and after they occur. Here's 2023 by the numbers. FEMA responded to more than 100 disasters last year. Survivors received more than $1.3 billion to jumpstart their recovery, and we had nearly $12 billion to help rebuild infrastructure damaged by disasters. You'll see the grant funding below, which help communities to become more resilient and more prepared for future disasters. And as you see, each year we find that more and more disasters occur due to changing climate. But we're ready, and we've taken action. In 2023, we had a busy hurricane season. Our National Response Coordination Center deployed over 1,200 staff and hundreds of interagency partners for over 150 days of activation. Think about that for a second. That's almost a half of the year that we were activated across the country for disasters. We've improved our capabilities to support rapid damage assessments from ground, air, and space. And you'll see the full extent of the resources we have at the ready included on this slide below. and our dedicated and highly trained staff are ready to hit the ground running. So what should you do before disasters, and why is preparedness important? Preparedness helps to save lives, it saves you money, protects your property, and helps your community to come back faster following a disaster. The best time to prepare is now. If you don't take anything else from this presentation, just know that ready.gov is a great resource that you can always go back to and find these materials to help best prepare you, your family, your friends, and those in your community. Visit ready.gov, make an emergency plan, sign up for emergency alerts and warnings from our local officials, and review your insurance policies. And finally, know your evacuation zone. I'll go more in depth into each one of these so you can hear a little bit more about how to best prepare for ahead of disasters. So 12 ways to prepare, as you see here. There's many different ways, and we'll go a little bit more in depth into these, but signing up for alerts, practicing your emergency plans, safeguarding your documents, and knowing your evacuation routes are all great parts of being best prepared for hurricane season. Making an emergency plan. Step 1, put a plan together by discussing these questions below with your family and your household and your friends. How will I receive emergency alerts and warnings? What is my shelter plan? What is my evacuation route? What is my household's communications plan? And do I need to update my emergency preparedness kit? If you don't have an emergency preparedness kit, we'll help you to think about what needs to go into that kit as well. Step 2 is to consider specific needs in your household. Are there cultural and religious considerations to take into effect? What languages are spoken? If you have disability or access and functional needs, be sure to include devices and equipment in your to-go kit. Make sure that you're being best prepared for your pets and service animals. Take into effect any dietary needs and the different ages of the members within your household. Step 3, you can create a family emergency plan at ready.gov in the link here on this slide, and we'll provide these slides afterwards to the office. But the final step is to practice your plan. You know, Mike Tyson says everyone has a plan until they get punched, and it's important that you practice your plan so that you're able to withstand those punches from the hurricanes and be best prepared when disasters occur. So building an emergency kit, what should you put in that kit? As you see here, you should include food and water, batteries, flashlights, first aid kits, cell phones with chargers and a backup battery, manual can opener, and many, many other items that you should include in your kit. These are just some of the basic things that you should include. That food and water should be for a several days supply. Make sure it's non-perishable so that you can continue to be best prepared as whether it's the power going out or you're in a shelter, whatever you may need, make sure you have these resources at the ready and ready to go. There's also some additional emergency supplies you should keep into account. That can include maybe books, games, or puzzles for your children. You might want to include a fire extinguisher. You might also need to include stuff for your pet or a baby or an infant. Prescription and non-prescription medication is also important. Cash is helpful while traveling. And the big important thing here from this slide is make sure that you have family documents, such as copies of insurance policies, identification and bank accounts, records saved either electronically or in a waterproof and portable container. The best thing you can do now is to scan those important documents so that you have them at the ready, store them in the cloud or some other way online to protect them. And if you don't have those means, have a waterproof portable container that you can store them in and you can bring on the go with you if you have to evacuate. Also, be sure to check your insurance coverage. Make sure you snap photos of important documents and save them in a secure place. Once again, take videos or photos of your home prior to a disaster to help make those claims with your insurance provider. Consider purchasing flood insurance before the storm through the National Flood Insurance Program or private insurers as well. Be sure that you look over your insurance forms to know what you're covered for and what you are not covered for. 30 is the number of days it takes for flood insurance to begin. Don't wait until it's too late. We're already within hurricane season. Just know that if you go online today and you establish a flood insurance policy, it will take 30 days to go into effect. That means storms that occur between now and late July will not be covered by this policy. So the earlier you prepare, the better. You can also find out if you live in a flood-prone area or if flood insurance can help lessen your financial impact at floodsmart.gov. These are just some great resources that you can have at your ready and better understand your risk and how to best prepare for those risks. The FEMA Flood Map Center also helps to provide you, if you plug in your address, you can see exactly if you're within a flood zone so that you know how to be best prepared for insurance as well. Also, before an evacuation, be in the know. Stay tuned with your local officials, follow their instructions, get those notifications from NOAA or from FEMA, plan how and where you will go if advised to evacuate. Check and see if you have shelters within your area. Assemble your supplies and come up with a plan to stay in touch in case you're separated from family or friends. If you have a car, be sure to keep a full tank of gas if evacuation seems likely. If not, plan how you will leave if needed. You can decide that with your family, friends, and local emergency officials. Now we'll go to during disasters. So during and after an evacuation, be sure to check the FEMA app for shelters. Leave early enough to avoid being trapped by your weather. Secure your home and unplug electrical equipment that is not needed, aside from things like your refrigerator. Wear sturdy shoes and clothing, and check with your neighbors who may need assistance. And follow recommended evacuation routes. Do not take shortcuts, as these may be blocked and cause further delays for you and your family to leave out of a weather zone. After an evacuation, be sure to check your devices and consider getting backup batteries in case of power outages. Let your family and friends know when you leave and when you arrive, and make sure that your supplies are capable to last you until you get home. Avoid down power lines or utility lines, as these may be deadly, as you've heard before through NOAA's presentation. These can be after the disaster, these can impact lives, and we really want you to stay away from that. Including in that means using your generator outside and away from your home, and never run a generator inside your home or garage. And if there's water, be sure to stay away from it and don't let your kids play in it, as it may be contaminated. How do you prepare your home? Like I said, always make sure that your generators are run outside to avoid carbon monoxide poisoning. Fill up your gas tank if you have one. Keep it in the garage to protect it against damage if you have a garage. Make sure you cover your windows and hurricane shutters with plywood or other things. As I grew up in the Orlando area, I remember from those 2004 hurricanes, specific memory from Gene when a piece of the fence came flying through our window. So be sure to board up your home if possible, and make sure that you secure anything that's kept outside, including lawn furniture or anything else that may be picked up by wind. Keep your trees and shrubs well trimmed to ensure that they don't break away and cause further damage to your home as well. Think before you act as well. If you're going to shelter in place, be sure that you charge your devices. You stay tuned to hear from local officials for when and where to get the best information. Make sure you close your windows and lock your doors to protect your home and those inside. Floodwater is dangerous. As we say, turn around, don't drown. Please do not drive through water if you see it following a disaster. And once again, don't let your kids or anyone else play in it or reach it, because it may be electrified or contaminated. This here is just a declaration process, as you'll see, for FEMA declarations. That comes from the governor requesting it, or a tribal declaration can also be requested, but that is submitted by the governor and then approved by the president through FEMA. So it goes to the president for a decision, and once approved, you'll hear the information be pushed out through our channels, but you'll get it through the FEMA app as well, through your local officials, as well as your congressional office, who will help to make those notifications known on when assistance is available. So FEMA assistance, as you know, including individual assistance, is tied to these disaster declarations. Once they're approved, we'll get that turned online and help to push out the information on how to register. Speaking of, we'll talk about after disasters here and the best way to register. So the 3 best ways to register for disaster assistance are visiting our website, disasterassistance.gov. Downloading the FEMA app, once again, comes in handy both before, during, and after disasters, or calling our line 800-621-FEMA or 800-621-3362. Now, we know that not everyone may have access to phone or internet services, especially after a disaster, which they may be impacted with communications. So we will also send disaster survivor assistance teams out into your community following a disaster to help register people at their homes in their communities to ensure we reach everyone possible. We'll also set up disaster recovery centers within the community, and we'll help amplify that messaging so you know where to register there. Or if you have any questions with your casework, you can get a one-stop shop where you show up and you can talk to federal officials and get your casework completed and get the assistance that you're eligible for at those locations. We also have services to translate in other languages as well. We'll continue to push that messaging along because we want to be sure that everyone who is eligible for assistance is able to apply. Important to note that if we have people coming around to register you for assistance, we will show official documentation and identification. We'll never ask for any kind of money. So if somebody's asking for money, we're not showing you their official ID. That is not somebody with FEMA, and we encourage you to contact your local law enforcement to report any fraud that may be occurring as well. But let's talk a little bit more about that individual assistance that you would be eligible for if your county is declared for individual assistance for a federal declaration. Almost 3 months ago, we made the most significant update to our individual assistance program in more than 20 years. We're expanding the type of assistance we offer and making that assistance both more accessible and easier to navigate. We established new benefits to help people cover the cost for essential items like food, water, baby formulas, diapers, in the aftermath of a storm. We've also expanded our immediate housing options to make our assistance more flexible for individuals who are unable to return home after a disaster. In addition, survivors with disabilities and certain medical conditions may now be eligible to make their homes even more accessible than they were pre-disaster. These are just some of the ways we took feedback from survivors, state partners, Congress, and others to tailor our programs to the needs of individuals on their worst day, because we know that stronger recoveries lead to more resilient communities, which in turn are better prepared for future disasters. Our individual assistance changes here, I've just listed a few more here. Like I mentioned, just 3 buckets here for new benefits that we're providing, expanding eligibility, and helping to make a simpler application process. We want to make sure that people have the access to assistance that they need, that they don't have to fight with the federal government to get what they are eligible for. As you see, this new assistance has been put into effect for all new disasters, which will occur within the state of Florida and across the country. We just want to share that information here so we can encourage you all, and you can be the force amplifiers for us, for others in your community who may have said, well, I wasn't eligible for FEMA assistance in the past, so I don't want to register this time around. Really encourage them to apply this time as we have the new individual assistance program in place, and they may be eligible for some of our additional and expanded eligibility. So with that, the time to prepare is now. We have resources available at ready.gov and listo.gov for Spanish speakers, outline preparedness material steps for all types of hazards. So much of our preparedness comes down to basic knowledge of risk and what to do in case of an emergency. And access your risks, know your evacuation zones, and prepare for whatever that season brings. I thank you for your time. And with that, I will now turn it back over to the Congressman's office.
Hey, Peter, thanks so much. We have a couple of questions actually, just following up on what you just shared about FEMA assistance. We have a couple of folks asking about how FEMA can support people who have been dropped by their home insurance policies, because as you may know, Florida is dealing with a property insurance crisis, leaving people paying astronomical costs for home insurance or simply not having home insurance. And so while FEMA is not a substitute for her insurance, what kind of immediate needs can FEMA provide support with to people?
So I know that's an issue in Florida and some other states across the country. That is typically the insurance is handled through the state legislature. I know there's been some sessions going on to help address that issue, but from FEMA, you can go to the National Flood Insurance Program and call to see if you're eligible to register for a flood insurance through FEMA, through the National Flood Insurance Program. That's an option. And then as well, too, we'll take that into account when you register for assistance at the time of a disaster.
And following up on that, we have a lot of renters in Central Florida. Is FEMA able to provide assistance to them?
Absolutely. Great question. FEMA assistance is available to both homeowners and renters. So that can help you with, well, it can help for home repairs for those who own the home. Renters can also get assistance with multiple different avenues. They can apply online through those 3 different sites, through our website, through the app, or call, and they can also register in person, but they are eligible for assistance.
Cool. I'll hand it over then to NOAA. I wanted to ask y'all about on the theme of weather preparedness and hurricane season in summertime. What are your predictions for this year's record-setting heat temperatures, and how does it play a role in hurricane season? And also, how can folks be prepared for that kind of extreme heat when they're outside?
Sure. Yeah. What we can say, this far out, we've still got many more months to go with this summer. The one concern that we have are those very warm water temperatures that are surrounding the peninsula. And generally speaking, as the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic waters continue to warm, they contribute more of their own moisture to the atmosphere. And it's one of the reasons why it feels so humid outside. So as we move later into the season, those dew points and relative humidities, the amount of moisture in the atmosphere will continue to increase. So we'll see gradually warmer and warmer temperatures. So last year we had to issue several heat advisories and heat warnings, which are our ways of communicating those more rare days when the heat reaches critical thresholds that can affect many people, not just those who are working outside, participating in sports, or actively working as part of their job. So there's a couple resources that we encourage people to refer to through this upcoming summer season. That includes watching our website and our forecasts for those heat indices as they reach those critical thresholds for a heat advisory, which is 108 degrees, or an excessive heat warning, which is 113 degrees. That is one way of finding out that it is forecasted to be very warm and humid outside. We also have wet bulb globe temperature, which also takes into account the sun angle and being outside for extended periods of time. That's another way to gauge heat risk outside. But then a really neat thing that we're experimenting with this year is the Centers for Disease Control project that involves heat risk, which takes into account high and low temperatures and compares them to what we would expect for this time of year. So we can start to sniff out those days that are unusual for the time of year. So as temperatures warm and stay elevated at night, we can communicate that heat risk, because it is a cumulative effect. Heat does build up in the body over time. We're not able to cool down on those nights that have, those warmer than usual temperatures. So between heat index, wet bulb globe temperature, as well as the new CDC heat risk tool that the National Weather Service now has for the entire country, those are 3 tools that we have available to help keep people informed and safe this upcoming summer season. I don't know if Dave had anything else to add.
All I was going to add was tying back to the hurricane situation. And when you plow a hurricane through an area and all of a sudden the power is out. As a matter of fact, it may be out for a while. There may be 12 to 15 inches of rainfall that was just experienced, right? And the heat stress can get really, really tough, right? And so, without air conditioning, that heat stress builds up and accumulates very, very quickly. And then when you add exertion on top of that, people trying to cut up trees, people trying to clean up, people trying to get back home, all those indirect deaths or injuries that Mike talked about up front really begin to materialize. That's always a big concern after a significantly impacting hurricane.
Yeah, and one thing, I was just going to add real quickly that the heat, the post-storm fatalities and deaths and risk is really disproportionately skewed towards less resilient portions of the population, the older demographics, people who are less resilient to being outdoors in heat, people who may have more issues with cardiac arrest and other underlying health conditions. And most of those indirect fatalities are associated with major hurricane landfalls. They disproportionately affect older portions of the population and men in the aftermath of major hurricanes.
We also have someone asking if heat advisories are sent out through NOAA weather radios.
That information will be sent out across NOAA weather radio. It will be read across the radio. It does not alert the radios, but if people are actively listening to NOAA weather radio, heat advisories and excessive heat warning, those products will be published on there and on our website as well, which is always available 24 hours a day and 7 days a week.
And I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So my last question is, where can everyone find information from you all? And is that is that information available in other languages like Haitian Creole, Spanish, and so forth?
We'll let Mike start.
Yeah, I'll start. You can get to the National Hurricane Center website at hurricanes.gov. As I mentioned, we have products in English and are translating them now into Spanish. We could be looking to translate them into additional languages as we go forward, but primarily in English and Spanish. And that's where you can find sort of that storm scale information on hurricane hazards, watches, and warnings, and our graphical products.
And from the National Weather Service perspective, same applies. We have English and Spanish available on our website through weather.gov and weather.gov/Melbourne. Some offices also have additional language. They're working with their local partners, but realize what Mike referred to with respect to the AI project that we have ongoing. We're going to start off this year with the Spanish language, but with time, as we're able to train it and gain those lessons learned, we'll be able to expand to other languages. And we anticipate being able to do that very rapidly too. So while it might not be available for everything right now, we hope to get to a point within a few years, thanks to the advancements of AI, we'll get to a point where that information will be available for anyone.
Yep, even Haitian Creole.
Even Haitian Creole,
Yep.
And from the FEMA perspective, we have ready.gov. You can also access other languages there, including Haitian Creole. We have Vietnamese, simplified Chinese, and other languages. If you don't find the resources there translated to your language, just let us know. We can get those translated for you. Then listo.gov as well for Spanish speakers. So we can find all those at ready.gov or listo.gov.
And Peter, just one more quick question from the audience. We have someone asking, how quickly does it take for FEMA to be on the ground after a hurricane?
So we have folks on the ground typically even before the hurricane hits. We'll have them pre-positioned. We'll have resources pre-positioned just outside of the path of the hurricane. And then we'll have folks on the ground in the communities typically once it's safe. So usually in a day or two after the storm, we'll get them out into the community to help start registering them once we have that disaster declaration approved. So you'll see the FEMA folks out there with their vest on and their IDs helping to register folks.
All right, well, I think that's all then. Thank you, David, Mike, Will, Peter, for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us and with Central Florida as everyone gets ready for hurricane season. And thank you to everyone for joining us tonight.
You are certainly welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Enjoyed it.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.